Coin traders, how we doing? Thanks for joining me for the show. Bitcoin just closed the weekly candle along with all of the rest of crypto. So I actually want to talk about Bitcoin right now on this current setup because a lot of things are actually different about this setup than what we've seen previously before. And although we've had 4 weeks now of constant downside pressure as indicated by these weekly candles, all 4 bearish and downside pulling back, we do still have a lot of very bullish things and things that typically we see in stronger market trends. And just want to talk about it for a little bit in this show and kind of go over what we're seeing and then also some things on the monthly chart as well for Bitcoin and kind of compare it to what we see historically out of Bitcoin and a lot of the other cryptos. So right now, just want to talk about how although we actually closed bearish again, the thing that's very interesting right now about Bitcoin, and we can even see this across the board, is that we're actually decreasing in overall sell-off pressure. Now, this actually started before when we got to our current trend high right now for Bitcoin. So when we saw Bitcoin hit 73,757, that did start to kickstart the kind of sell-off pressure, and you can see by the spinning top doji here candle that we actually got a lot of indecision, but ultimately that wasn't the high for the close. Now we were looking at a close of actually 71,320 for Bitcoin, and so on the current candle that just closed, we're looking at about little over an 11%, not quite 12% pullback from the close. But we know that a lot of downside wicks on these candles are happening, and you can see just how big the size of these wicks, or excuse me, the lower shadows of these candles are with respect to the actual body of the candle. So essentially what that does confirm is just a lot of buying pressure and showing that even though we are seeing some downside selling pressure action continuously week over week for the last month, we know that we're seeing a lot of dip buying and actually a lot of buy pressure. So there's not a ton of strength and confirmation of sentiment. So more or less, this is kind of just shaping up to be more of a bear flag on this upside direction and this upside move. And so especially the thing that's notable right now about this Bitcoin weekly chart is just how we have maintained confirmation of the 12-period exponential moving average. So even on the last test, coming off of the confirmation of the Bitcoin ETF announcement back in January, we did get a little bit of a sell the news, but that wasn't sustained for that long, only about a couple of weeks. And we actually kicked off and found very nice closing support and support in general once prices did get below this 12-period EMA. So that's exactly what we have found on the candle that closed a little over a week ago. So once prices did get below the 12-period EMA, we actually saw a lot of dip buying, and that's kind of what created this long lower shadow. Now, if we look at the bearish candle that just closed, we actually got a little bit more of an upside wick and a body of a candle that didn't necessarily have that much of a shadow to the downside, a very, very small minimal shadow. So what we experienced on the current week is a little bit of upside pressure after all of this buying kicking off the 12-period EMA. But we actually got a lot of support that maintained higher than what we saw sell-off pressure for the week close. So although this is kind of a bearish looking candle, we still don't necessarily have that strong of a body with respect to how big the last couple of shadows were. So even if we look at the last 3 shadows, for example, on the first bearish candle, looked at a downside shadow of about almost 7%, to the upside that is about a little over about almost 7.5%. Then the following on candle as well, downside pressure about 7%, and then also to the upside a little over 7%. But if we look at the bodies, upside only about 3%, and then downside only about, a little over 3% as well, compared to about 5.5 to the downside, we're looking at about 5.2. And then finally, the hammer candle right here, we're looking at almost 8% downside, and then upside, we're looking at 8.42 to the upside on the body, 1.2, and then downside about 1.2 as well. So we can see just how much buying pressure has come in and a lot more than what we actually found on the body for specifically these 3. Now, when we talk about the one that just closed, it is a little bit more bearish, but obviously we have found our downside pressure and we did maintain a weekly higher low. So the previous weekly candle, we actually got to a low of 59635. And on the current candle that just closed, we're looking at a low of 62398. So we are actually finding weekly higher lows as well as weekly higher highs. So a lot of direction is going to come down to the current candle that we just started. So obviously a full week to see until that does close, but we're really eyeing this 12-period EMA. Like we said, we've already gotten one kickoff from it, and obviously the next candle still came in at a higher close. So just looking back, kind of like what we saw the last time, same almost sort of situation where we did have a little bit more follow through. But like we said, we know that selling pressure overall has been decreasing over the last couple of months. So if we can see exponential moving average pressure hold up, this will confirm and turn into a very nice bull flag. And then likely either we will go into a little bit more consolidation period, or more realistically, we probably will see a little bit more bounce, a test of the upside closing resistance level, which again does come in at 71320. And then from there, trying to break that and maintain, continuing a longer term uptrend for Bitcoin, kind of like what we saw after the kickoff back in January that led up to the current all-time high for Bitcoin. Now, one thing I want to look at on this Bitcoin weekly chart is the RSI, the relative strength index, and talk about where we're at historically versus what happens after that. So we did have huge overbought levels. So when we actually had our high here, which wasn't even the high of the close, we actually had RSI coming in at 88.33. So if we look left, the last time we actually saw an RSI around that level, 88.33 perfectly actually, was on the candle that closed on 15th of December. Or excuse me, it actually started on the 15th of December. And so that was also coming off of a lower high on RSI. So a little bit more of that bearish divergence that didn't necessarily play out. Obviously lower highs after that with higher highs for the close. But when we actually had the last time that hit that level, we didn't get the 4 week over week pulling back with decreasing volume like we saw. And so even looking back before that in the candle that started on the 4th of January, where we started at 94.70, we saw 2 weeks of pullback, didn't quite even push back all the way to the 12-period EMA before rallying up. So the thing about this part of the market was this is actually when peak euphoria and excitement was coming in from the start of the year up to the spring of 2021, which is nowhere near what we're at right now. So the great thing about what we're seeing right now is that we're getting a couple of months of longer term pullback and retracement to actually confirm and kick off this 12-period EMA along with this decreased sell pressure like we've talked about. So this means that we're actually setting up right now for a much greater shot at a lot higher highs, and nowhere near this is a topping signal or indicator that we've already seen our all-time high come in and we're going to see a lot more pullback. Now, again, that's not to say that we couldn't actually end up losing the 12-period EMA and seeing a little bit more pullback down to even potentially the 26-period EMA holding the support, which also correlates to a very nice price level just above the $50,000 range that we saw as previous price support resistance, as well as resistance on this kind of head and shoulders type pattern that we saw when we did experience our previous all-time high back in 2021. So I think if over the next couple of candles we actually do lose this 12-period EMA support, that is going to be a pretty big sign that likely we are going to experience a little bit more prolonged pullback out of Bitcoin. But if we do continue to maintain this type of support and actually see a little bit more upside, especially with some volume, as long as the sell pressure does continue to decrease, then likely I think what that'll mean is kind of what we've seen a lot of times where this actually is just a short-term pullback and we do continue another upside move and rally, which is kind of one of the things I think we're more likely set up for right now. But with that, I actually do want to talk about what we're looking at on the 1 month chart right now, because the last time we've seen this type of setup and pattern, we've actually seen pretty significant sell-offs. So we're about to close the monthly candle in about 2 days. And if we do actually continue to hold, and I'm expecting a close, then what this means is that every time after we've seen this much solid upside pressure month over month with increasing bullish volume, we actually get 2 to 3 months of solid retracement and pullback pressure, as we have seen on the last market cycle, where we actually need to at least get back to the monthly 12-period EMA, which is typically what we see a test of each time. So from current levels, that actually would be a retracement of about 25%. Now, if we talk about it in terms of the next month, it actually might be in between 20 and 25. But also, if we do see a little bit more increase in 12-period EMA or for the next monthly candle and the following on one, if we do look left, that would put us actually in perfect alignment with the previous resistance that does come in and would be right around that 50K psychological mark. Now, since we were talking about weekly RSI, I actually want to look at the monthly RSI, because every single time we've had a lower, higher high on the RSI for the month. So not necessarily to say that this is the current all-time high that we're going to get to, but one of the things that we also have to be mindful of is just how the stochastic RSI does play out in these type of situations and what it ultimately means for the long term. Now, a lot of expectations are kind of more of the sentiment that we're going to get kind of more of a 2017 type super cycle and pretty big significant rally, especially with all the bullish sentiment coming in with the Bitcoin ETF. So I think right now we could actually be in a little bit more alignment with that type of thing where the stochastic RSI on the monthly actually does maintain on top of the 80 line. And so typically once we see stochastic RSI, what we actually need to see is it maintaining above that 80 line, just kind of like we saw back in 2017. And that's when we do go into a parabolic rally. And in those instances too, we also see Bitcoin support maintain on top of the 12-period EMA. However, if we do lose that and also see RSI pull back below the 70 line, as well as see stochastic RSI pull below the 80 line, that's typically one of the signs that does lead to a longer term sell-off and a bear market, more or less. And so, like I said, I don't necessarily think that where we're at right now is enough hype and euphoria and that this is the peak of where we're going to see the RSI go this cycle for the monthly RSI on Bitcoin. And so realistically, I think it could be more kind of like what we were experiencing out of the first part of 2017. But like we said, nonetheless, we also have to be extremely mindful of the long term on this chart setup. But one of the things too is kind of how the volume has set up for this type of cycle so far. So looking back at 2017, we saw low volume come in, but eventually getting really high to where we saw the peak volume coming in for the month at over 2.125 million was our peak. So obviously right now with the monthly that closed last month, less than 1 million, the current one that's going to close about 590,000. So a long way to go, especially when we talk about sell pressure on the monthly compared to what we saw on the bullish top. And so even looking back at the 2021 cycle, just not necessarily as much volume as we saw back in 2017. But like we said, if we do maintain that trend support on the weekly, then we could actually expect some inside bars to be coming in or even potentially a slighter pull off, but a small candle that would go down to about the closing level, which is just above the 60,000 on this monthly chart for Bitcoin here. Now, if we get a better view from the logarithmic chart, a couple of things to talk about both cycles here. So from the 2017, we actually saw when prices did break below the 50-period EMA and get stuck up as resistance on the 12 and 26. Once we broke that, consolidated sideways and kicked off again, we saw a pullback that did lead us to the 12-period EMA, obviously with a lot of dip buying, which is what creates that lower, longer shadow. And then from there actually ran up about 16 bars or 16 months in this case, where we actually saw the price just have a complete air gap on top of this 12-period EMA the whole way up, as we did maintain this very parabolic movement to the upside when Bitcoin topped out around the $20,000 level. Now, similarly on the last bear market cycle, once we actually broke down below the 50-period EMA, we didn't sit there long, and once it did reclaim, kickstarted a mini cycle before pulling back, testing the 12-period EMA as well. Obviously, we did have the COVID crash, so that was a little bit of manipulation that we're not really factoring in too much, but then reclaimed on top of the 12, confirmed it as this period of support, and then from there had a very nice period of upside as well. Obviously, the peak period of hype and euphoria came in, and we saw from there about 7 bars or 7 months of upside, but to the all-time high actually had about 13 to 14 before putting in that all-time high, despite it not being the all-time high in sentiment and things like that. So essentially the point I'm getting at and what we're seeing right now is that once price actually pulled back, reclaimed, and then confirmed 50 as that supportive period and rallied to the upside, we know that a back test and retracement is coming, but whether or not it sits sideways or actually sees some pullback and losses is what we are needing to look out for. And that's one of the reasons that we're hoping the weekly chart can hold up and actually provide support on that 12-period EMA. So that way on this monthly chart, we actually start to sit sideways a little bit longer, kind of like what we do in a lot of these instances where it's post-halving. So the point I'm getting at is that charts are never going to be identical in setup, and especially market conditions and things like that. But we know that a lot of patterns are always fractal type where they do start to make similarities. And we can't necessarily say with perfect certainty what's going to happen, but we can base things on trends and kind of what they have done previously, because overall market sentiment doesn't necessarily change as much as a lot of external factors do. And so like we talk about, we do see some gains in this type of scenario and setup, but overall, even sitting sideways isn't the worst thing. And so we have seen a lot of upside just due to a lot of ETF hype and a lot of the ETF external factors from institutions. But right now, that's not necessarily creating a lot of selling pressure, and that's kind of why we're hoping on the weekly we do maintain EMA support on top of the 12-period EMA, because that would allow this monthly Bitcoin chart to just be that much stronger. Now, so flipping over into the daily chart really quick before we wrap up, because just want to look at these exponential moving averages right now, how tight they are, and we've already seen a bearish cross of the 12 and 26, but right now we have just seen a bearish cross of the 12 over the 50, so still waiting for the 26 to cross. And the last time we actually saw that with Bitcoin was coming right off of the ETF announcement, where we saw a little bit of sell the news. And so essentially, once we got the bearish cross of the 12 over the 50, we actually didn't have that many days before a rally and an uptest actually confirmed a resistance of this 26-period EMA before finally breaking it, backtesting it, flipping it as support, consolidating for about a week and a half, and then finally seeing the next leg to the upside. So overall, from the point of seeing a bear cross on the 12 and 26 back to a full bullish cross, we were looking at 19 bars, or excuse me, about 20 bars, so about 3 weeks. So if we were to basically take that same amount of time, we would be looking at a flip coming in about the 5th of May, so about another week or so. And so ideally, especially if we do maintain a higher low over this chart, we don't see much sell pressure come in. That gives a lot more confidence to the bulls that we'll probably see a back test of these EMAs, and that in that instance, likely a test and trend change in the shorter term, especially testing the upside, where we saw a price high come in for 67467. So that would be the price point that the bulls would actually need to get to in order to break this trend, back test these EMAs that do flip, and then in that instance, probably consolidate for about a week or so before seeing the next leg of to the upside, if we do in fact confirm this EMA as that supportive level on the weekly chart, which would be extremely nice, because in that instance, that would allow the bulls to back test this 12-period EMA, buy the dip and confirm it, thereby making this very nice flag pattern and then being back on their way to the upside. So 5th of May would be a week from today as of time of recording, so we will see what happens over the current week. Like we've said several times, though, not necessarily expecting too much excitement to come out of Bitcoin, but obviously if we do break back bullish on top of these exponential moving averages on the daily, that would be an extremely good sign, reclaiming daily exponential moving average support, as well as confirming 12-period exponential average support on the weekly chart as well. And then especially seeing a decrease in overall sell pressure, especially with this kind of formation, setting up for a very nice bear flag, or excuse me, a bull flag to come in with a very nice potential for some upside break, if in fact we do end up seeing very minimal sell pressure come in and a very nice breakout from this downtrend line and a break of price level resistance as well as exponentials. So it would end up being a very nice setup if we do see a repeat of what we saw coming off of the sell-off from the ETS Sell the News event, which is kind of what we saw out of the halving event, a little bit more of that Sell the News. And so especially with altcoins being down 50 to 60% for a lot of them, very strong cases for the next leg of upside to start becoming in here, especially after kind of this longer period of sideways trading, more or less, for Bitcoin. So yeah, with that, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today on this Bitcoin update. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. Also, make sure to drop me a comment in the comment sections below, issues, predictions, disagreements, all that stuff. Do love getting back to each and every one of you. Don't forget to drop me a follow over on Twitter or X if you haven't done so just yet. @coin_trades is the handle. Do post very frequently over on Twitter or X, so looking forward to chatting with everyone over there. That is going to do it for now, though, so stay safe, take care. Appreciate all the continued love and support, as always, does mean so much, and I will catch you back, coin traders, in the next video.